The rain streaked the glass doors of the inner-city urgent care clinic like it was trying to wash the night away. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly over empty chairs and the sharp smell of antiseptic. It was just past 3 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, that dead hour when the city holds its breath between Monday's chaos and the promise of dawn. Only a tired mother rocking a fussy baby in the corner, an old man dozing with a magazine on his lap, and one patient in the shadows, holding his side and breathing shallow through the pain. Stacey G. Ward stood behind the high counter in her light blue scrubs, stethoscope around her neck, hair pulled into a tight, practical bun the way her mother used to wear it back in Tampa. She was finishing a triage note. Ain't say so. Pen moving steady across the clipboard with the kind of focus that came from years of practice. The front door suddenly slammed open hard enough to rattle the glass in its frame and send a shock of cold air through the waiting room. Before we dive deeper into Stacey's story, if you're new here, please hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I'd love to say hello to you, and if you're already part of this community, thank you for being here. Your support means everything. Now let's continue. A man in a soaked black leather trench coat and balaclava stormed in, silver pistol raised high like a torch. 2 more masked men followed close behind him, their boots tracking water across the linoleum floor. The mother gasped sharp and pulled her baby down to the floor, covering the infant's head with her whole body. The old man jerked awake with a start and slid down in his seat, trying to make himself invisible. The security guard, a heavy-set man in his 50s, who'd never expected to face real danger, dove behind the front desk, like he'd been waiting for this moment his whole life, his radio clattering to the floor. Stacey didn't flinch. She didn't gasp. She didn't even blink. She set the pen down slowly, deliberately, like she was just finishing her sentence before attending to an interruption. She lifted her eyes from the clipboard with the same measured calm she'd used to greet any patient, and met the gunman's gaze directly through the ragged holes in his mask. The barrel of the pistol was inches from her forehead now, close enough that she could see the scratches on the metal, close enough that the cold seemed to radiate from it. Her breathing stayed even, deep and controlled. Her shoulders never rose with panic. Her hands remained still at her sides. The gunman's voice came out tight and cracking at the edges, high-pitched with adrenaline. Open the controlled substances lockup. Now. Right now. His gloved hand trembled just enough to make the barrel drift slightly left, then right, like he couldn't quite hold it steady. Stacey studied him the way she studied a patient who wouldn't admit how much pain he was in. Not the gun, not the immediate threat, the man holding it. She saw the tremor in his fingers, the way his chest rose and fell too fast, the sweat already beading on the exposed skin around his eyes despite the cold rain he'd just walked through. She saw desperation, not conviction, fear dressed up as violence. "You're bleeding time and adrenaline on my floor," she said, her voice calm and low, almost gentle, like she was reading a chart out loud to a colleague. "And you still won't get what you came for." The robber blinked hard behind the mask. He had expected screaming, begging, maybe a frantic scramble for keys or a dive behind the counter like the guard had done. He'd expected fear that matched his own, not this quiet, unshakable stare, and a voice that cut straight through the chaos like a scalpel through skin, precise and sure. He stepped closer, the gun shaking harder now, his voice rising. "I said open it. Open it now, or I swear I'll—" Stacey didn't move. She didn't raise her hands in surrender. She didn't back away or flinch. She just held his eyes with that weary, terrifying stillness, the kind that only comes from someone who has already survived worse nights than this one. Someone who has seen real darkness and come out the other side. But where did that calm come from? How does someone stand so still when death is inches away? To understand that, we need to go back. Back to Tampa, Florida, where Stacey grew up in a small house on the edge of town, where the paint was always peeling and the air conditioner only worked half the time. Back to a childhood that taught her what real strength looked like. Stacey's mother, Caroline Ward, was a home health aide who worked double shifts most weeks, moving from house to house in the Tampa heat, caring for elderly patients who couldn't care for themselves. Stacey would come home from school to find her mother just walking in, exhausted, her scrubs rumpled and her feet aching, but still smiling, still asking Stacey about her day, still making dinner even though she could barely stand. "Baby," her mother would say, sitting at their tiny kitchen table with a cup of weak coffee. "The world is full of people who need help. And if you can help, you do. It doesn't matter if you're tired. It doesn't matter if it's hard. You help, because that's what makes us human." Stacey grew up watching her mother give everything to strangers. She watched her hold the hands of dying people who had no family left. She watched her clean wounds and change bedding and speak softly to confused minds. And she watched her come home every single night, no matter how hard the day had been, and still have enough love left over for her 2 daughters. When Stacey was 16, her mother sat her down in that same kitchen and told her something she would never forget. "Stacey, you're smart. Smarter than I ever was. You could do anything you want with your life. But I hope you choose to help people, not because you have to, but because you want to. Because once you see what it means to really save someone, to pull them back from the edge, you'll never want to do anything else." That conversation changed everything. Stacey started volunteering at the local clinic after school, just filing papers at first, then shadowing nurses, then learning to take vitals. She fell in love with the work, the precision of it, the way a steady hand and a calm voice could mean the difference between life and death. By the time she graduated high school, she knew exactly what she wanted to do. She applied to nursing programs, worked 2 jobs to save money, and eventually got accepted to a program in South Korea. It seemed crazy at first, going halfway around the world to study nursing, but her best friend from high school, Sunmi, had moved back to Seoul after graduation, and she'd convinced Stacey to apply. "You'll love it here," Sunmi had said over a crackling video call. "The program is amazing, and you'll get to see the world. Come on, Stacey, live a little." So Stacey went. She left Tampa, left her mother and her younger sister Maya, and flew to Seoul with 2 suitcases and a heart full of hope. The nursing program was intense, the language barrier was brutal at first, and the culture shock hit her hard. But she adapted. She always adapted. She learned Korean phrase by phrase, studied until her eyes burned, and worked clinical rotations that pushed her to her absolute limits. It was during one of those rotations, late in her 2nd year, that everything changed. Stacey was walking home from the hospital after a brutal 14-hour shift. It was past 2 a.m., raining hard, the kind of rain that soaked through everything. The streets were empty except for the occasional taxi splashing through puddles. She took a shortcut through an alley behind a shuttered clinic, her sneakers squelching on the wet pavement. Her mind already on her bed and the few hours of sleep she might get before her next shift. That's when she heard it, a wet, rattling cough. Then a groan, low and desperate. She stopped, listened. There it was again, coming from the shadows near the dumpsters. Stacey's first instinct was to keep walking. It was late. It was dark. This was not her neighborhood, not her problem. But then she heard her mother's voice in her head. "If you can help, you do." She moved closer, pulling out her phone for light. The beam cut through the rain and found him. A young man, maybe mid-20s, crumpled against the brick wall in a spreading pool of blood. His shirt was soaked black with it. His face was pale, lips tinged blue. His eyes fluttered open when the light hit him, unfocused and glassy. Stacey didn't hesitate. She dropped to her knees beside him, hands already moving to assess the damage. Gunshot wound, lower left abdomen. Entry wound, no exit. Bleeding heavily, but not arterial. She pressed her hand against the wound, felt the hot blood pulse against her palm. "Hey," she said, her voice cutting through his delirium. "Stay with me. You hear me? Stay with me." His eyes tried to focus on her but couldn't quite manage it. He mumbled something in Korean she didn't catch. She knew she should call an ambulance. She knew she should get help. But something in the way he'd been left here, in the way he was dressed, in the look of him, told her that calling the authorities might be the worst thing she could do. Whoever had shot him might still be looking. Whoever he was running from might be waiting. So she made a choice. The clinic behind them was closed, but she'd seen the back door before. Old lock. Probably easy to open if you knew what you were doing. She ran to it, used a rock to smash the small window, reached in and unlocked it from the inside. Then she went back, hooked her arms under the man's shoulders, and dragged him inside. He was heavy, dead weight, and every inch she dragged him left a smear of blood on the floor. But she got him inside, got him onto an exam table, locked the door behind them. Stacey worked in the dark, using only the light from her phone. She found supplies in the cabinets, gauze, saline, sutures, antibiotics, everything she needed. Her hands moved on autopilot, the training kicking in. Stop the bleeding first, clean the wound, stitch what you can, keep him stable. She talked to him the whole time, her voice steady and low. "You're going to be okay. I've got you. You don't die on my watch. You hear me? You don't die on my watch." The man's eyes opened briefly during the worst of it, when she was digging out fragments of fabric and debris from the wound. He looked at her through the darkness, couldn't see her face, only heard her voice. That calm, yet steady voice promising him he'd live. And then he passed out again. Stacey worked for 2 hours. By the time she finished, the bleeding had stopped, the wound was closed, and his pulse was stronger. She set up a makeshift IV drip with fluids she found, left antibiotics and instructions written in shaky Korean on a piece of paper. And then she left. Slipped out the back door and into the rain like she'd never been there. She never saw his face. He never saw hers. She didn't know his name. Didn't know who he was or what he'd done to end up bleeding in an alley. All she knew was that she'd saved a life that night. And that was enough. Stacey never told anyone about that night. Not Sunmi, not her mother, not her professors. She just went back to her life, finished her nursing program, and eventually moved back to the States when her mother got sick and needed help caring for Maya, who'd been diagnosed with a rare autoimmune disease that required constant medical attention. She buried that night deep, filed it away as just another strange experience from her time abroad. Another moment in a life full of moments. But the man in the alley never forgot. How could he? That voice had pulled him back from death. That voice had stayed with him through 8 years of nightmares and close calls. Through rising through the ranks of the organization that had left him for dead. Through becoming someone powerful enough that people feared his name. Duck Hwan had spent years looking for the woman who saved him. He'd sent people to every hospital in Seoul, checked every nursing graduate from that year, followed every lead that went nowhere. He never found her. Eventually, he convinced himself he never would. Until tonight. In the far corner of the waiting room, half hidden in shadow, a man in a sharp but slightly rumpled suit set his phone down without a sound. Duck Hwan's fingers pressed harder against the wound in his side. But he didn't wince. His dark eyes narrowed, fixed on the nurse behind the counter. He knew that voice. Not from tonight. Not from any clinic waiting room. 8 years ago, in a dark alley behind a different building, that same steady voice had leaned over him while blood poured out of him and said, "You don't die on my watch." He had never seen her face that night, only heard her voice in the dark. And now it was here again. Cutting through gunfire and fear, like it had cut through the rain all those years ago. The gunman's finger twitched on the trigger, but the shot never came. Stacey didn't blink. She just watched him the way she watched a fever spike. Something dangerous. Something that needed managing, but nothing that changed the rhythm of her night. The two masked men behind him shifted, restless, their bags half full from the quick grab they'd made in the back storage room. One glanced at his leader, waiting for the order to move, to leave, to do anything other than stand here in this terrible standoff. "You're wasting time," Stacey said, her voice still flat and low, matter of fact. "Keys are on the wall behind me. You already took what you could carry. Leave before this gets worse for you." The leader's breathing rasped harsh through the mask, loud in the sudden quiet. The barrel dipped, then jerked back up, his indecision written in every trembling movement. He hadn't planned for calm. He'd planned for panic, for someone to hand over the oxycodone like a gift wrapped in fear. Instead, he got this nurse in scrubs, stethoscope hanging like a quiet warning around her neck, staring through him like she could see every bad choice that had led him to this moment. He took one step back, then another. "Let's go," he muttered to his crew, his voice cracking. They bolted for the door, rain swallowing them whole as they vanished into the night, the door slamming behind them with a final rattle of glass. The clinic exhaled. The mother sobbed quietly over her baby, rocking back and forth on the floor. The old man muttered prayers under his breath in Spanish, crossing himself over and over. The security guard peeked up from behind the desk, his face pale and sweating, his hands shaking as he reached for his radio. Stacey picked up her pen, finished the note she'd been writing when they'd burst in, and only then reached for the phone to call the police. Her hand was steady. Her voice was steady when she spoke to the dispatcher. Everything about her was steady. But was she really calm? Or was this something else? Something darker? In the corner, Duck Juan stood slowly, pain shooting sharp through his side where the old wound pulled, where the scar tissue had never quite healed right. But he ignored it. He'd learned to live with pain. Blood had started seeping through his shirt again from the sudden movement, a dark stain spreading across the expensive fabric. He slipped out the side exit before the sirens got close, melting into the shadows with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent a lifetime disappearing. The two silent men who'd been waiting in the car outside fell into step beside him without a word. As the black sedan pulled away from the curb, headlights cutting through the rain, he spoke without looking at them, his voice low and absolute. "Find her name, everything about her, where she lives, where she works, who she loves. I want to know everything, and I want it now." 2 days later, the video hit the internet. Someone's phone had caught the whole thing. The footage was grainy, shaky, filmed from behind a chair where someone had been hiding, but it was clear enough. Stacey behind the counter, unmoving, the gun inches from her face, her voice steady as steel cutting through the chaos. "You're wasting time." It spread like a fever through social media. The ice-cold nurse. Nurse faces down armed robbers without flinching. "This woman has nerves of steel." Comments poured in by the thousands. Hero, legend, badass. The clip racked up millions of views overnight, shared and reshared across every platform. Stacey watched it once on her phone while sitting on the couch in her tiny apartment, Maya asleep in the bedroom down the hall. She watched herself stand there, watched the gun shake in the robber's hand, watched her own face stay blank and calm. Then she turned it off and set the phone down. She didn't feel like a hero. She felt tired, bone tired, the kind of tired that sleep couldn't fix. The call from administration came the next morning, early, before she'd even had her coffee. "Miss Ward, this is Director Chen," the voice on the other end said, tight with discomfort and corporate caution. "We need to discuss what happened at the clinic." Stacey sat on the edge of her couch, still in yesterday's scrubs because she hadn't had the energy to change. "Okay. We appreciate your composure during the incident," Director Chen continued, each word carefully chosen, rehearsed. "But you violated protocol. You engaged with armed suspects. You escalated a hostage situation. The hospital can't risk the liability. I'm sure you understand." Stacey's hand tightened on the phone. "I de-escalated it. They left. Nobody got hurt. Policy is clear, Miss Ward. No negotiation with armed suspects under any circumstances. We have to let you go. Your final paycheck will be direct deposited. We'll mail your termination paperwork." The line went dead. Just like that. No thank you for your years of service. No acknowledgement of the lives she'd saved, the overtime she'd worked, the holidays she'd missed. Just a click in silence. Stacey sat there for a long time, phone still pressed to her ear, listening to the dial tone. No job. No insurance. No way to pay rent, let alone the stack of medical bills piling up on the kitchen table. Maya's medication alone cost $3,000 a month. The treatments, the specialists, the equipment. It all added up to a number that made Stacey's head spin. She walked slowly into Maya's room. Her little sister lay curled under blankets, oxygen machine humming softly beside the bed, the sound that had become the soundtrack to their lives. Maya was 22, but looked younger. Her cheeks hollow from the treatments that kept buying time they couldn't afford. Her skin pale against the pillow. "Hey," Maya whispered when she heard Stacey come in, smiling weakly, trying to sit up. "You okay? You look like you saw a ghost." Stacey forced a smile, the same smile she'd been giving Maya for years, the one that said everything's fine even when it wasn't. Just a long shift. She sat on the edge of the bed, took Maya's hand, felt how thin it had gotten. "Don't worry about me." But worry was all she had room for now. The savings were gone, drained by months of medical expenses. Unemployment wouldn't cover half of what they needed. The applications she'd already sent out to other hospitals had gone unanswered. And now this. Nights blurred into days of endless job applications, rejection emails, and the slow dread that settled in her chest like a stone, heavy and cold. She couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, just stared at the ceiling of her bedroom and waited for the next thing to break. She didn't cry. She hadn't cried in years, not since her mother's funeral. She just stared and waited. A week later, a black car idled outside her apartment building. No markings, tinted windows so dark she couldn't see inside. The kind of car that didn't belong in this neighborhood, where the paint peeled off the buildings and the streetlights were always broken. The driver got out, a tall man in a dark suit, holding an umbrella against the drizzle. He knocked on her door with the kind of confidence that came from knowing she'd answer. "Miss Ward?" he asked when she opened the door, his accent faint but unmistakable. "Someone wants to speak with you." Stacey hesitated, hand on the doorframe. Every instinct told her to say no, to close the door, to call the police. But then she thought of Maya's medication running out in 3 days. She thought of the eviction notice she'd found in the mail that morning. She thought of having absolutely nothing left to lose. She grabbed her coat. The car took her across the city, away from the broken streetlights and peeling paint, up into the hills where buildings turned to glass and steel and money. The penthouse was on the top floor of a building so tall she could see the whole city spread out below like a map of lights. Inside, everything was quiet, all dark wood and low lighting. Expensive art on the walls, floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the city lights flickering through rain. A man stood by the window back to her, hands clasped behind him. Tall, sharp suit perfectly tailored, shoulders straight despite whatever pain he carried. When he turned, his face was unreadable, strong features, dark eyes that didn't miss much. He moved with careful control, like someone used to pain, used to hiding it. "Stacey Ward," he said. His voice was low, accented faintly with Korean. "Thank you for coming." She stayed near the door, hand still on the frame. "Who are you?" He gestured to a chair, expensive leather, probably worth more than her rent. "Sit, please." She didn't. "You know my name. I don't know yours." Dakwon. He studied her the way she studied patience, quiet, thorough, taking in every detail. "I was at the clinic that night, in the corner." She remembered him now, the man holding his side, the one who hadn't panicked either, who'd watched the whole thing unfold with that same careful stillness. "I need a nurse," he went on, his voice steady, businesslike. "Private, full-time, good pay. Very good pay. Someone who doesn't shake when they see blood. Someone who can keep their mouth shut." Stacey's arms crossed over her chest. "I just lost my job for not shaking." "Why me?" He looked at her for a long moment, and something in his eyes shifted, something old and buried. "Because you see things clearly, even when a gun is pointed at your head, even when everyone else is falling apart. You stay steady. That's rare. That's valuable." She thought of Maya's meds running out, the empty fridge at home, the eviction notice she hadn't opened yet because opening it would make it real. "What exactly would I be doing?" she asked. "Tending to me, my people, sometimes injuries, chronic conditions, things that can't go through normal channels. Discretion is required. Absolute discretion." She knew what that meant. She'd seen enough in the ER to recognize the world he lived in. The kind of people who came in with gunshot wounds they claimed were accidents. The kind who paid in cash and disappeared before the police could ask questions. But Maya's breathing had been shallower this morning. The oxygen machine was starting to struggle. They needed a new one, and insurance wouldn't cover it. "I'll think about it," she said. He nodded once, pulled a card from his pocket, handed it to her. Heavy card stock, expensive. "Just a phone number, nothing else." "Take your time, but not too much." She looked at the card, then at him. "How much are we talking?" He named a figure that made her breath catch. Monthly, plus housing if she needed it, plus medical coverage for her family. She called the number that night. She started the next night. The penthouse had a full medical suite tucked behind frosted glass doors, better equipped than most clinics she'd worked in. State-of-the-art monitors, show a full pharmacy locked behind steel, surgical equipment that looked brand new. Duck Juan's men came and went at odd hours, some with fresh cuts that needed stitching, some with old scars that never healed right, some with infections from wounds they'd tried to treat themselves. She stitched, cleaned, prescribed, kept her distance, didn't ask questions, did her job. But mostly it was him. Duck Juan had chronic pain from injuries years old, the kind that never quite went away no matter how much treatment you threw at it. Shrapnel still lodged near the ribs, too close to major vessels to risk removing. Old fractures that had healed wrong, nerve damage that flared up without warning. Nights when the ache kept him awake, pacing the penthouse like a caged animal. She checked vitals twice a day, adjusted pain medications with a careful hand. He changed dressings with the same quiet efficiency she'd always had. He never complained, just watched her work, silent, intense. Not like a boss watching an employee, like someone trying to solve a puzzle he'd carried for years. One night, after she finished wrapping a new bandage around his ribs, he spoke without looking up. "You don't flinch," he said quietly. "Not at blood. Not at any of it." Stacey cleaned her tools, putting them back in their precise places in the cabinet. "It's my job." "No." His voice was soft but certain. "It's more than that. You've seen things. Been through things. I can tell." She met his eyes then, for the first time really looked at him. For the first time, she saw something behind the control, behind the careful distance he kept. Recognition, maybe, or something deeper. Reverence. She didn't ask what he meant. Not yet. But something in the quiet between them had started to shift, like a door opening just a crack. The days settled into a rhythm after that. Quiet nights in the penthouse medical suite. The city lights blurred below like a distant storm. Stacey moved through her work with the same steady hands, checking wounds, adjusting pain meds, noting changes in charts. Duck Juan's pain eased a little under her care, the lines around his eyes softening, his sleep improving. But he still watched her more than he spoke, his eyes following her movements around the room. She felt his eyes on her sometimes. Not intrusive, not threatening, just present, like he was waiting for something she hadn't figured out yet. Then Marcus found her. She was walking back from the pharmacy, arms full of Maya's new prescriptions. The ones Duck Juan's pay had finally covered without a second thought, without the sick feeling of watching her bank account drain to zero. Rain had started again, light and steady, the kind that soaked through everything if you stayed in it long enough. She turned down a side street to cut home faster, taking the shortcut she always took. And there he was, leaning against a lamppost like he belonged there, like he'd been waiting. Marcus. Taller than she remembered, but thinner now, face harder, the boyish charm gone and replaced with something desperate and mean. Disgraced doctor turned whatever he was these days, stripped of his license after too many complaints, too many pills going missing, too many patients left worse than when they came in. His eyes lit up when he saw her, that old possessive gleam that used to make her stomach turn. "Stacey." His voice slid over her like oil, smooth and slick. "The famous nurse. I saw the video. My brave girl." She stopped dead in the middle of the sidewalk. The bag slipped from her fingers, pills scattering on the wet pavement, rolling into the gutter. Her body locked up completely, the robbery calm shattering into something raw and old and terrible. Heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat, but outward still as stone. Freeze. Submit. Survive. The old patterns taking over like they'd never left. Marcus stepped closer, that smile twisting into something uglier. "You look good. Real good. Successful now, huh? Working for some rich guy in the hills. I could use a nurse like you. We could be a team again, like old times." His hand reached for her arm, shred of fingers brushing her sleeve the way they used to before the bruises came, before the shouting started, before she learned to go small and quiet and still so he'd lose interest faster. She couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but stand there while the rain soaked through her coat, terror flooding every frozen nerve, every muscle locked in place. He leaned in close, breath hot on her ear, smelling like cheap whiskey and desperation. "Don't fight it, baby. You never could. You never will. Then he let go, laughing softly as he walked away, hands in his pockets. Think about it. I'll find you again. I always do. She didn't pick up the bags, didn't even look at the pills scattered across the pavement. She just turned and walked the long way home, legs numb, mind blank, the freeze response holding her together like ice. That night at the penthouse, she found Duck Juan in the dim light of his study, reviewing something on a tablet, his reading glasses perched on his nose. She stood in the doorway for a long time before he noticed her, hands clasped tight to stop them shaking. I'm quitting, she said. Her voice came out flat, but her hands shook just a little, just enough. He set the tablet down, took off his glasses, looked at her fully for the first time in days. Why? I bring trouble. My ex, he saw the video. He's back. He'll come here eventually. For the drugs. For me. You don't need that kind of trouble. Duck Juan didn't move, didn't react. Tell me about him. She hesitated, then walked in slowly, sat across from him in the leather chair she'd refused that first night. The words came slow at first, halting, then all at once like a dam breaking. That calm everyone saw during the robbery, it wasn't brave, it wasn't strength. It was this. She wrapped her arms around herself, holding tight. Freeze. It's what I did with him, with Marcus. For 3 years. He'd get angry over nothing, stupid things. And I'd go still. Dissociate. Shut down so it hurt less, so I could survive it. I'm not strong. I'm not brave. I'm just broken. That's all I am. That's all I'll ever be. Her voice cracked on the last word, the sound sharp in the quiet room. She stared at the floor, waiting for him to agree, to confirm what she already knew, to let her go. He was quiet for a long time. So long she thought maybe he wasn't going to respond at all. Then he stood slowly, walked to a cabinet built into the wall, and poured 2 small glasses of something dark and expensive looking, handed her one. She took it, but didn't drink, just held it, feeling the weight of the crystal. You think you're broken, he said softly, sitting again. But I know different. She looked up. 8 years ago, he began, his voice low and careful. I was bleeding out in an alley behind a clinic in Seoul. Young, stupid, left for dead by my own people after a deal went bad. Shot in the gut and left to die in the rain. A girl found me. Student nurse, I think. American. Couldn't have been more than 22. 23. She dragged me into the shadows, broke into the clinic, stole supplies, stitched me up in complete darkness. Never asked my name. Never turned on a light so I could see her face. Just worked fast. Steady. Like she'd done it 1,000 times before. Stacey's breath caught in her chest. She talked to me the whole time, he continued, looking at her with something like wonder. Told me I was going to be okay. Told me she had me. Told me, you don't die on my watch. Over and over, like a promise, like a prayer. He met her eyes directly. I lived because of her voice. That voice. Calm. Sure. Unshakable. It pulled me back when nothing else could. When I was ready to let go, that voice held me here. Tears started falling then, silent, hot. The first tears Stacey had cried in years. They ran down her cheeks, and she didn't wipe them away. You didn't freeze then, Stacey, he said gently. You saved me. You ran toward danger when everyone else would have run away. You aren't broken. You're not weak. You're the glue. The thing that holds when everything else falls apart. You're what keeps people alive when they should be dead. She stared at him through the blur of tears. That was you. He nodded slowly. I've been looking for you for 8 years, sent people to every hospital in Seoul, checked every nursing graduate from that year. Followed every lead that went nowhere. I never found you until I heard your voice in that clinic. The same voice, the same calm. I knew immediately. I won't accept your resignation, he said quietly. But if you stay, it's your choice. I won't force you. I won't trap you. But I want you to know that you saved my life once, and I will never forget that. Never. She nodded once, unable to speak. Didn't leave. Just sat there with him in the quiet, crying silently, letting years of pain finally crack open. Marcus came 2 nights later, and when he did, everything changed. The penthouse was quiet, most of Duck Kwan's men out handling business across the city. Stacey was restocking the clinic suite, organizing supplies with the meticulous care that helped her think, when she heard the side door click open. Not the main entrance, the service door that was supposed to be locked. She turned, and there he was. Marcus, slipping in like a ghost, eyes wild with that manic energy she remembered too well, pockets already bulging with vials he'd grabbed from an unlocked cabinet in the hallway. Jackpot, he whispered, grinning that same grin that used to charm everyone before they knew better. Told you I'd find you. He saw her then, really saw her, and froze for just a second before advancing, hands out like he was approaching something skittish. Come on, baby, help me carry this. We'll split it 50-50, start over somewhere new. It'll be different this time, I promise. Duck Kwan appeared in the doorway behind him, silent as death, arms crossed. He didn't move to intervene, didn't reach for a weapon, just watched, his dark eyes moving between Marcus and Stacey. Stacey felt the old freeze rising like a tide, numbness creeping in like ice water in her veins. The familiar pattern starting to take over. Shut down, go small, survive. But something else pushed back this time. Duck Kwan's words from 2 nights ago. You're not broken. You're the glue. Maya's smile when the new meds came on time, when her breathing got easier. The life she'd started to build here. The sense of purpose she'd found again. She didn't freeze. Instead, she stepped forward, directly toward him, closing the distance he expected her to keep. Marcus blinked, confused, the grin faltering. Stacey? You look thin, Marcus, she said, her voice low and clinical, the same tone she used to assess patients. Really thin. Your liver's probably failing from all the drinking. I can see the jaundice starting in your eyes. And your hands shake when you're off the benzos, don't they? That's why you need these so bad. That's why you're here stealing like a common junkie. He stopped advancing. What are you? Your heart rate's elevated. I can see it in your neck. Blood pressure through the roof. You're sweating even though it's cold in here. You're one bad night from a stroke, Marcus. Weak. You always were weak. She moved closer. In eyes locked on his the way she'd locked on the robbers that night in the clinic. You used to hit me because you couldn't stand being small. Couldn't keep a job. Couldn't keep your medical license. Couldn't keep me without force. But look at you now. Breaking in like a desperate addict. Pathetic. Marcus backed up a step, his face paling, the bravado cracking. Shut up. You don't know. I'm not the patient anymore, Marcus. Her voice stayed steady, terrifying in its calm, in its absolute certainty. I'm not the girl you used to push around. I'm the one holding the scalpel now. And if you ever come near me or my family again, you won't like what I do with it. He dropped the bags, vials clattering on the floor, hands trembling so badly he could barely control them. Turned and bolted for the door, nearly tripping over his own feet in his rush to escape. Duck Kwan stepped aside to let him pass, then closed the door quietly behind him with a soft click. Stacey stood there in the quiet clinic, breathing hard now, adrenaline finally catching up with her. She pulled out her phone with shaking hands, dialed the police, gave the tip anonymously. Description, direction he'd run, the stolen medication. They'd find him within the hour. She knew it. And this time, there'd be consequences he couldn't charm his way out of. When it was over, when she'd hung up and stood there in the low light, Duck Juan walked in slowly, carefully. She turned to him and, without thinking, reached out and pressed 2 fingers to his wrist, checked his pulse. The old habit, the thing that grounded her, steady, strong, alive. He covered her hand with his, warm and solid. Didn't say anything. Didn't need to. They sat together in the low light of the medical suite, side by side on the exam table, looking out at the city below. Not boss and nurse, not patient and savior, just 2 people who had pulled each other from the dark, who had found in each other something worth fighting for. Partners. 6 months later, Maya's treatments were working. Really working. The colour had come back to her cheeks. Her breathing was easier. She could walk without getting tired. Stacey had taken her to every specialist, used every resource Duck Juan provided without question. And finally, there was hope. Stacey still worked at the penthouse, but now it felt different. Not like a job, like a purpose. She'd built a small team of trusted medical professionals, all discreet, all skilled, who helped her run a quiet operation providing care to people who couldn't go through normal channels. Not all of them were criminals. Some were just desperate. Some were undocumented. Some were running from things they couldn't name. She helped them all, just like her mother had taught her. And Duck Juan, he watched her work with that same quiet reverence. But now there was something else too. Gratitude, respect, maybe even love, though neither of them had said it yet. One night as she was finishing up, he asked her something he'd been holding back. "That night in Seoul," he said quietly, "why did you help me? You could have walked away. Should have." She thought about it for a long moment. "Because my mother taught me that if you can help, you do. It doesn't matter who they are or what they've done. You help because that's what makes us human." He smiled then, a real smile, rare and beautiful. "She would be proud of you." "I hope so," Stacey said softly. "I really hope so. If you've made it this far, thank you for being here. This story is about more than just a brave nurse or a dramatic robbery. It's about recognizing that what we think are our weaknesses might actually be our greatest strengths." Stacey's freeze response, the thing she thought made her broken, was actually what saved Duck Juan's life. Her ability to stay calm in chaos, to dissociate from her own fear, became the very thing that made her invaluable. The lesson here is simple but powerful. Sometimes the things we survive reshape us in ways we don't understand until much later. Our scars don't make us broken. They make us capable of surviving what others can't. They make us strong in ways we never asked for but desperately need. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt broken or stuck in patterns you can't escape, I want you to know something. You're not alone. And that thing you think makes you weak, look at it again. Really look at it. Because it might be the very thing that makes you extraordinary. Please hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And drop a comment telling me what you think. What would you have done in Stacey's position? Have you ever discovered strength in something you thought was a weakness? Thank you for watching. Thank you for being part of this community. And remember, you're stronger than you know.